Hello, hello, and welcome to Artpop Talk. I'm Gianna.
And I'm Bianca.
How you doing?
Good. It's been a minute.
Oh my gosh, it feels like forever ago since we talked. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everyone was able to have a nice 3-day weekend for Labor Day. Hope you got a nice break from us also talking at you and giving you homework all the time. How are you doing?
Good. I was able to hang out with Juliana this past weekend.
Of course.
Had a lot of fun. It was so nice to see her. And she was actually telling me that I need to rewatch Sister Sister because they just put it on Netflix. And she was telling me in the car that there's an episode where they go to a museum, and she said it's like the funniest thing. And Mr. Mosby from Sweet Life of Zach and Cody is like young, and he's the teacher that takes Tia and Tamara to an art museum. So I'm really excited. I need to watch it, and then I'll report back. Juliana said there's like this hilarious gif that comes from this episode where they like trash an art museum.
Interessant. Yeah, me and Theben watched the first episode of it.
Oh, I need to watch.
Yeah, well, you have time. It'll be there for a while.
Thank God I'm still stuck in the queue and I have endless amounts of time to watch Sister Sister.
Yep.
So how are you?
I am good. It's been a crazy couple of weeks here, but I'm just happy to be back. And, I hope everyone is well rested and also ready to be back and just getting ready for some art and pop content, because that's what we do.
Totally. So we have a funny story to tell all of the little Artpop Tarts.
I'm dead.
I'm excited about. So I was hanging out with my boyfriend on Labor Day weekend, and I was scrolling through Facebook. Gianna and I both have a friend that we went to school with. Her name is Jen, and she's an artist. She's a printmaker. And so I'm scrolling through, and I'm like looking at this, and one of her works came up on my feed. And my boyfriend is like, sees it. He's like, oh, that's really cool. And I was like, yeah, it's my friend Jen. Like, she does like such cool stuff. She works a lot with the human body. Like, it's so cool. And he's like, oh, yeah. And so then we just, we kind of like move on and go about our day. And then later on, I was talking to Gianna on the phone, and she was like, oh, by the way, did you see Jen's print that she posted online? I was like, oh, yeah, actually, I did see that earlier today. And then Gianna was like, yeah, that's me. And to give Gianna maybe some context on like what you is in that piece.
What I is. Yeah, so like Bianca said, Jen works with the human form, and when we were in school, I asked her to model for me for one of my sculptures, and she was like, oh yeah, cool, maybe we could do a modeling trade. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, that's awesome. And it actually worked out great because I was looking for someone to model for because I wanted to be able to experience what I'm asking other people to experience. Mm-hmm. So she does print, but it's a very, process-based and sculptural process. She does these skin printing or body printing. So essentially what we did was she put ink and rolled it all over my body, and then I laid down, so like I was the printing block, and I pressed down on this piece of mylar, which is kind of like plastic, and she creates these kind of body scanned images, and then those kind of work as the foundation of her art. And
you're like a little Nike stamp.
I'm a little Nike stamp. I liked it. It was super cool. It was super fun.
Yes.
So it was so amazing. And so I was just scrolling through Instagram the other day, like I do. And then I just stopped and was like, oh, that body looks familiar. It's because it's me.
It was just so funny because, like, I'm familiar with Jen's work, and I know that you had modeled for her, but I never saw of course, I hadn't seen what that might look like or what any of the final product was. And so she posted
Right.
this. I was like, oh, this is stunning. Like, this is so beautiful. And,
Well,
you know,
thanks.
Andrew's sitting there with me and he's like, oh yeah, this is cool. And neither of us have like a clue that it's Gianna naked. Like,
I'm dead. Oh my god, that's the best. You know, that's just what happens when you're in the
when you're
art
involved
world.
with artists, someone's bound to get naked. And
Yeah. You take nude images of yourself and you put them on the internet. Advice from, Myra Rose.
hi, I'm
I'm
Moira.
Myra Rose. Well, anyways, I'm glad that you liked it, and
It was beautiful.
I, haven't been able to meet Andrew yet, but we already have a good icebreaker to talk about.
I love
Wow.
it. I love that.
So, Bianca, do we have any art news for today?
Yes, we've got a little interesting art news for you all. You may have heard it by now since this was announced on August 25th. See in Black launched a fundraiser to sell prints by Black photographers. So See in Black is a collective of Black photographers organized to dismantle white oppression. And according to the group's mission statement, it sells works to support causes that align with our vision of the Black prosperity. Quote, we stand in solidarity with our greater Black family to take immediate action for the improvement of Black lives, end quote. The goal was to highlight the Black experience through a variety of lenses. Prints were sold for $100 each, with the proceeds going to nonprofits working towards Black advancement. So over the course of this 2-week sale from the collective See in Black, the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York bought an undisclosed number of these prints from the collective. So then in late August, the museum informed the photographers whose work it acquired that their prints would be featured in an upcoming September exhibition. This was found through a screenshot that was posted by a photographer on social media. So he posted this and was talking about this on Twitter. The email noted that, quote, in recognition of the photographer's work, they'd also get an artist lifetime pass for the museum. The email did not mention any additional compensation for the artist. So basically, the artists were informed that their work was going up in this exhibition, and what they would receive in return was a free entrance for them and a guest to the Whitney Museum.
Oh my gosh.
So once the controversy started spreading through social media, the group See in Black responded with a statement that read, here's part of it. The Whitney's use of the work acquired through the See in Black print sale at significantly discounted prices, the proceeds of which were donated 100% to those charities, constitutes unauthorized use of the works to which the artist did not consent and for which the artists were not compensated. See in Black is not affiliated with the Whitney's exhibition. So I first heard about this on Instagram coming from the Gorilla Girls, and then they tagged See in Black, and then I looked at See in Black's Instagram page and saw their announcement. There was a writer who tweeted, quote, I can't believe how evil it is for the Whitney to, quote unquote, acquire movement art priced with intent for the community to use for fundraising and flyering, end quote. She continued that it's extraditive to turn around and parrot social justice language in a show that accomplishes precisely what it positions itself to be against. Then, when these emails were released and the artists were talking about it and art critics were tweeting about it, the Whitney announced that the show Collective Actions would be canceled. Then the Whitney released a statement on their Instagram, and the curator of the show said, my sincere hope in collecting them, these works, was to build on a historical record of how artists directly engage the important issues of their time. Going forward, we will study and consider further how we can better collect and exhibit artworks and related material that are made and distributed through these channels. I understand how projects in the past several months have had special resonance, and I sincerely want to extend my apologies for any pain that the exhibition has caused. So, Gianna, I was kind of curious if you heard about this anywhere else, and I'm curious what you think of this as an artist. I mean, how would you feel if a major museum like the Whitney Museum bought your work in a way that you received no compensation? It was for a discounted price that was supposed to go to charity, and then simply offered you a free pass to visit the museum.
Well, it's a huge slap.
For you and a guest, so I don't know.
Yeah, oh, right, yeah, my +1, because I'm just dragging everyone to the museum with me all the time. But
because you obviously live in New York, so, you know.
Right, yes. No, this is a huge slap in the face. Aside from this issue, there would be no museum today if it wasn't for the maker, if it wasn't for the artist. And this is where we run into such issues, because your whole institution relies on the ability for other people to make and produce work and for you to keep up with current trends. These are contemporary artists that we're talking about, and it's just a huge slap in the face for you to turn around and do whatever you want with their work without any kind of discussion. And especially considering the content, just considering the content of this exhibition, like, this is what we're talking about, this elitism and going against what this organization stands for. I mean, not even to have any kind of discussion about it, but just to go along with their plans and then be like, by the way, here's a pass for you.
Right. Yeah. And the Whitney seems to be kind of always at the center of things like this. And I wasn't surprised that the first place I saw it was from the Guerrilla Girls. And rightly so. I mean, the Guerrilla Girls are kind of always calling out the Whitney, but why are they always calling out the Whitney? I mean, yeah, it's such a disappointment. And it just feeds into that elitism 1,000%. And it's also museums who are clearly dictating the value of art and decreasing that kind of accessibility, because See in Black is one offering the proceeds of this sale going to charities for Black advancement, and then they're making art accessible, and these artists are trying to make Black art more accessible. And it just seems very, very strange that the Whitney isn't even trying to access the artists in any way.
Right. Again, because in light of this content and in light of this exhibition, you have an incredible tool, which is not only the work, but the platform that the artist has and the platform that the museum has. If you have this common goal, you should be able to invite the other party in on that conversation so you can reach your common goal together. Like, if you have the artist that you can reach out to, and if this is something you really want to do, then that's where you should always start. See how willing the artist is to be included and what you're trying to do. I just think that's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, this is it all seems very weird, because there were only a few channels that I'm kind of tuned into who were talking about this. And I saw the post from the Whitney, and it's still up on their Instagram, but it didn't seem like there was like a ton of buzz coming from my circles about this. It was very like rooted in kind of activist art groups like the Guerrilla Girls.
Yeah, same for me here. I really think the Guerrilla Girls just need to make some prints or make a post that just says, really, again, like, we have to call you out on your BS again.
That's like all I want, is to be a Guerrilla Girl.
Yeah.
It's my dream. That's my dream job.
Yeah.
Ugh, Guerrilla Girls, if you're listening, I love you so much. Who do you think's in the Guerrilla Girls now?
I think about that all the time. Like, I just lay in bed and I think about...
I know, it's so cool.
I have no clue.
Well, everyone, today is very exciting, because if you haven't already heard, which, like, you totally have, because you totally follow us on Instagram and all of our different channels, and
Obviously.
Obviously. It is our 20th episode.
Yay.
So today's Artpop Talk is a Q&A session with all of the amazing Artpop Tarts. I can't believe it's been 5 months since we started Artpop Talk. 5 months of APT and 5 months in the queue. And we thought, what a better way to celebrate than getting to know all of you a little bit better. This is something that's really important for Gianna and I. I mean, it's difficult to feel like we can have productive conversations with all of you all the time when Gianna are the ones kind of sitting here and having this conversation with each other, but we really, really value all of you. And so we wanted to see what your interests are, and through those questions, see how this community of cuties are thinking about arts and popular culture. So our first question is from Clara. Gianna, would you like to read it for everybody?
Ooh, I would love to. This is a great question to start out with. So she really set the bar high, guys. But all right, so I've been around the arts my entire life, and something I realized from an early age is that not everyone is comfortable with the nude imagery. I often forget that the nude body, no matter how tasteful it seems to be, can be interpreted as shocking, raunchy, or even pornographic simply because of its mere nakedness. Do you have any interesting experience of nudity in art being completely misinterpreted? Not every piece of art will be or has to be liked, but what would you say to folks who argue that nudity automatically equals a piece of art to be pornography? Is it at all harmful to the arts that work is interpreted this way, or is it more of a to each their own kind of thing? Interested to hear your thoughts. Love APT and love you. Wow. Well,
we love you, Clara.
We do. This is a fantastic question. You know, we already started this episode talking about my tasteful nudes out in the world.
And she was naked.
As many of you know, my latest sculptural work dealt with the nude body, and I have had many conversations about the lines between objectification, sexuality, nudity, and pornography. So taking this question, does nudity automatically within the art mean pornography? So my answer is definitely 1,000 times no, it absolutely does not. But what we also have to take into consideration in regards to this question is that we have been able to have many discussions with people, me and Bianca both, inside and outside of the art world. And nudity in art, at least in my experience, only seems to be a bigger issue when we are talking about contemporary works, especially in the context of a museum setting, which I know Bianca would probably love to talk about here in a hot minute. But nudity doesn't seem to be an issue to audiences when looking at traditional or classical or historic works of art or objects as often. There are a lot of meanings as to why this is an issue in the contemporary art world. One being that sexuality and the human body are both complex and they're both fluid, and we don't have a social and educational system that always validates that notion. If we look back in history, sexually explicit images can be found aside from other nude images. So it's kind of, hypocritic of us to have this view of contemporary art and not traditional art. Taking ancient Greek and Rome, for example, nude statues and images exist because of the fascination they had with idealizing and perfecting the body. Aside from that idealization, explicit images exist for the sake of being erotic imagery. And yet, you visit a museum and you won't always see a sign that says, warning, nudity, or whatever in ancient Greek wing. But you will find it when you walk into some contemporary exhibitions or a lot of times feminist wings at museums. Taking another example, these there are these Greek red figure vases that I studied while I was in college, and they have these erotic images on them. We know that they were used at these symposiums, and we do know that wine and drinking and prostitutes were also a part of these symposium gatherings. So these wine cups and these vases were there just really to, set the tone for the night. It's interesting what we have in my experience. It seems to be more of a hot button issue with contemporary works than it does in traditional art. I think both in the museum setting, also in the classroom setting, I've experienced that as well. And I've experienced it within my own art and having critiques in classes. Not everyone in my classes was comfortable talking to me about my artwork, not because they thought it was pornographic, but because I was talking about a feminist topic and I was using a naked female body to do so.
I love this question because I do think that there's a certain element to Claire's point about to each their own. And I think for me, I've modeled for you, Gianna, I've modeled for a few other artists, and sometimes it's hard, even for me, to confront something like that because I'm not always comfortable with my own body. So sometimes the issue of nudity is also very personal, and it relates to how we feel about art on a personal level because of those personal experiences, and often how we feel about ourselves, right? And of course this can absolutely lead into body positivity for both men and women, obviously. But on a larger scale, why is it that when men make art, men for a long time being the only group of people allowed to study and make art from nude models, is nudity acceptable? So this is exactly what you're saying, Gianna. But when women make art showcasing naked bodies, it's explicit and it is censored. And this is something discussed in Linda Nochlund's iconic Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists essay from 1971. So if you haven't read this, it is a fundamental and critical publication to how we think about women artists and the introduction of feminist art history. And in it, Nochlund talks about how women originally weren't allowed to study the nude, which deterred their access to the study, exhibition, and acquisition of their art, of women's art. So I've studied this a lot in my research, and particularly in the final chapter of my thesis. It's about the exhibition of feminist art and how museums censor it. And Judy Chicago has also talked about this. We may have talked about this a little bit in our second episode on the dinner party, but Judy Chicago has come out today and been like, have you seen what's on Instagram? Like, my work is not pornographic. So when I was at the Brooklyn Museum, which is the only space in the country constantly dedicated to the showcasing of feminist art, there's a warning before you enter the space that it contains explicit content. So part of combating social inequalities is also combating an aversion to women exhibiting their own bodies. Now, I've also seen cases in museums where parents physically shielded their child's eyes. For example, there's a Robert Rauschenberg Venus, which was exhibited at a museum I worked at, which is essentially a pop art version of Botticelli's Birth of Venus. And a parent literally took their child, covered their eyes, and pushed them away and laughed and didn't want them seeing it. And it's not my child. It's, I'm not a parent. I have personal beliefs about this, but at some point, like, you can't dictate how other people feel about that, especially when it comes to kids. But back to feminist art, I've also worked on feminist art shows where we were required to put warning signs outside of the exhibition for fear that parents wouldn't want to bring their kids, or they would be offended when they got into the show and their kids were there. So I think that this question is really best answered as a call to education. Now, I understand that there's explanations and didactics that are helpful to contextualize artworks, and in no way am I suggesting that trigger warnings aren't needed for exhibitions not at all. That they're extremely important. But in my experiences, an aversion to nudity and art have almost always been towards women's bodies, which seems to be a fear of women's sexuality and women's independence. So instead of warning people about women's freedom before you enter a space, let's not do that and simply accept what's perfectly normal and natural.
Yes.
But again, to Clara's point, I mean, there is a certain element of to each their own, and that's okay, because that's what art is, and we want people to feel comfortable with this. But that additionally comes with education as well.
I agree, because just as you said, to each their own. That isn't just excluded in this conversation about nudity. That goes for whatever space you're in, whatever museum you're in, gallery, however you're experiencing artwork, you are entitled to your feelings and opinion about it. But yeah, it's those signs that say warning already give people a perspective about the space they're about to enter before they have even experienced it. So
right, it's a preconceived notion that what they're going to see should be warned against.
Right. All righty. So thank you, Clara, for that question. Up next, we have a question from Jewel. What is the worst thing you've ever seen someone do in a museum?
This is so great.
Buckle up.
One time I was working at an exhibition on interior design, and we had an amazing piece of furniture on display in the gallery. So we had this family come in, and they had children, and you see this kid like enter the museum doors, and he just went straight for the display of furniture. And he jumped and landed right on top of the furniture in the middle of the gallery.
No.
It's just, when you see it, so like, he was so quick. It was like we couldn't have actually done anything to like intercede. He just went straight for it. And then I think about this all the time. It gives me nightmares, honestly. When I was in Florence, I was at the Accademia Gallery where the Statue of David is. And there's this room full of busts in the gallery. And these are like actual busts, like actual pieces of Renaissance and Greco-Roman sculpture on display. Like they're not like replicas that you're just allowed to touch, right?
My heart is like beating in my chest.
They are like fully art objects. They're not, it just, I don't even understand what would prompt someone to do this. But I saw this white man, of course, it was a white guy.
Sure.
He took off his sunglasses, put the sunglasses on one of the busts, put his arm around the bust, and then posed for a photo with it. So this guy's sunglasses are on this bust in the hall next to the Statue of David, and he's just posing like a loser with like this bust wearing his glasses. And I'm just witnessing this, like,
Bianca, you've never told me that story before.
I've never told you that story before.
No, my heart is beating.
It's painful
so fast right now.
Because it's not good to touch that and put your arm around it, but the fact that some guy had the audacity to put his clothing on an art object and then pose for a picture with it, where is that picture? Did you post this picture anywhere? And then second of all, this, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe I can find a photo of the hall, but I will never forget. It's just like bust after bust after bust on these like shelves. And in my mind, with his arm around it, I'm picturing the entire wall of busts just like crumbling to the ground. And I mean, he didn't know how secure that, or, like you don't touch it, first of all, but God forbid something would have happened to it. Like with his arm around it, he could have knocked it off the shelf. Like, oh my God, that's maybe the craziest thing I've seen at a museum.
It's the sunglasses for me. Like, you gotta be shitting me.
It's the sunglasses. It wasn't even like a, so you know, with sunglasses you have to use like both your hands to set it on the like the face of the sculpture. You can't, it's not like a scarf where you could just like drape it over. Like, it was just like fully like facial grabbing. Oh my god, it was terrible. It was so terrible. And I also met Seth Rogen that day. And so I was just like feeling so cool because I had talked to Seth Rogen, and then we saw Seth Rogen waiting in line to see the Statue of David. And then I see this other guy like putting stuff. I was like, where am I? Like, is this a movie?
Jesus, man.
Am I on the radio?
Am I on the radio? Oh, man. Damn. Yep, that's a good one. Oof, 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 oof. For me and Theban were in New York for a little bit, and we were, I dedicated a day in our itinerary to go museum hopping, of course, The MoMA has a day of like the month or the week, I'm not exactly sure, but essentially they have a slot to where it's free admission for people to come to the museum, which is great. So we got to the museum a little bit early before this was about to start, and the woman who we were talking to at the ticket booth was saying that, oh, just to let you know, in like 2 to 3 hours, we're going to have, like, that's why you are seeing all these people lined up outside the building, because they're waiting to get in for free. So if you want to pay now and beat the crowd, you can totally do that. And I'm like, yeah, for sure, let's do that. And with us being both students at the time, having a student discount, it's a pretty affordable admission. So yeah, we went to go do it. I had been to the MoMA before, so I wasn't totally worried about needing to see everything. So we were just kind of taking our time and losing track of time. And then all of a sudden, this sea of people starts flooding in to the gallery spaces. And I'm sure the MoMA knows what their capacity is, knows how many people are allowed in the space. But damn, I would recommend, as a viewer and participant of the MoMA, as a patron, you should lower that number. It was a fucking madhouse. Everyone trying to, I will never forget, this is why every time I think about the Starry Night, that freaking painting, I think about all these people huddled around this one painting because it's the Starry Night, and everyone trying to take pictures of it, also using flash on their phone. And that wasn't even the worst part. I'm so used to people, using flash in a museum space. And anytime I see a person do that in a not so chaotic sense, I always say in a very polite way, hey, just to let you know, this is why flash isn't good for these artworks. So when you're taking other pictures, just turn your flash off. I think that's a really appropriate thing to do. The worst anxiety I had in that moment was seeing these sculptures in the middle of spaces. And again, Bianca, a bunch of white dudes leaning on the pedestals where these freestanding sculptures are placed. And I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You are 2 seconds away from knocking that over. Because not all of them are in glass cases. And they're on these very tall pedestals. And I had to get the fuck out of there, man. I was like, if something goes down, I'm not going to be a part of this. Like, my name will not be written in that history. Like, I got to get out of here. So, like I said, I am sure the MoMA is used to this. They do it all the time. I'm sure they know what their capacity is. And I think it's great that they offer free admission to the public. Absolutely wonderful. But please, for the love of God, lower that number, because that was not only unsafe for me, it wasn't an enjoyable experience for everybody. For anybody, it felt like people just trying to take their pictures of, the well-known pieces of art and then just getting out of there, and really, really detrimental to the safety and the care of the artworks. Is the most anxiety I think I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I grabbed Phoebe and I'm like, we are Peacing out.
Bye.
Bye.
Peace out.
Yeah, that was a rough one.
So we have a voice recorded message from Cindy, and we're going to play her question now.
Hi, Bianca and Gianna. This is Cindy. I have a question about something you all haven't talked too much about yet, and that's art theft. I know art heists are such a popular theme in movies and other entertainment media. I was wondering if you all have any insight from your careers in the art world about interesting art theft stories. I know there's a lot of stolen art of the world that's still missing. Is there a specific piece you wish could be found and returned over all others? Thank you, girls.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Cindy. This is such a good question. I love this question. I love art history drama, and I just don't understand why Hollywood doesn't make every movie about some art heist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically all I want to see. So when I listen to this question, actually the first thing that comes to my mind is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, which is an art museum in Boston. It is originally the home of Isabella Stewart Gardner, whose will called for her art collection to be permanently exhibited for the education and enjoyment of the public forever. Thanks, Isabella. So on March 18th, 1990, 13 works of art were stolen from the museum in Boston. Guards admitted 2 men who were posing as police officers responding to a disturbance call. And the thieves then tied up the guards and looted the museum over the next hour. The FBI has valued the haul at $500 million, and no arrests have ever been made and no works have been recovered. So to this day, I was on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum website, and they are still offering a $10 million reward for information leading to the art's recovery, which is the largest bounty ever offered by a private institution.
Insane.
Right? The stolen works were originally procured by Stewart Gardner and intended for permanent display at the museum amongst the rest of the collection. So within these stolen works, amongst them was the Concert, which is one of only 34 paintings by Vermeer. If you're familiar with Vermeer's work, he's an incredibly famous artist, but produced a very, very little amount of art. So any pieces that we do have are really, really valuable. And this is thought to be the most valuable unrecovered painting in the world. Also missing is a piece by Rembrandt, which was Rembrandt's only seascape. There were other paintings and sketches by Rembrandt, Degas, Manet, and they were stolen with some other objects. There was an eagle, and then there was also a Chinese ritual vase that was stolen as well. So experts on this case are kind of puzzled by the choice of artwork, since apparently there are more valuable works that were left untouched. And I actually am really looking forward to visiting the Stewart Gardner Museum. I have never been there before, but I really want to make a trip up to Boston and see this, because within the museum today, the layout of the collection has been left untouched. So this layout is permanent, and the frames are still hanging empty, which with the loss of the stolen works. So there are still placeholders for the artwork's return. So if anyone is interested, there is a documentary on this called Stolen. I believe it's from 2006, so it might be a little dated, but I was watching the trailer, and I would watch it. And then on Apple Podcasts, there is an NPR podcast about this called Last Scene.
Wow.
So there you go.
There you go. The more you know. Mm-hmm. That's insane. Art thievery is interesting to me because you have these very historic objects. It would be hard to sell them to a person because it's not like that person could display them in a very like public manner in their home. So to me, it's like, what would even be the point? Steal
the dark web, the black market.
Oh God.
Make a good chunk of change on that.
Next on Artpop Talk, we dive into the dark web and the freaking art market.
We solve art thefts here.
Ooh, we can start like a true crime art history podcast.
Yo.
Oh. No, I love this question. One, because it's a good crossover reference between art and pop culture in movies. I would say the interesting thing about the art world is that, you don't hear of many stories where this is a literal art heist in a cinematic sense, other than that crazy story Bianca just said. But what you do have are opposing opinions for why museums should turn over certain works or objects to other museums based on how they were originally obtained at that time. Even if how they were obtained and transported at the time was perfectly legal, it doesn't always mean that that is right or an appropriate place for those objects to be housed, and reevaluation needs to happen. So a good example of this dispute like this are between the British Museum of Art and the Acropolis Museum, and really the Greek government, actually. So the British Museum has in their collection what has been referred to as the Elgin marbles. And the Elgin marbles are the original architectural decorations for the Temple of Athena at the Acropolis, which is known as the Parthenon. If you picture the top of a classic temple and imagine that long, wide isosceles triangle at the top, that is called the pediment. And around in that area is where these sculptural decorations originally lived. And the British Museum has some from the pediment, the frieze, and the metopies, which is really a really, really big deal. They have some of the panthenetic procession, which is incredible. But they obtained these objects because in the early 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was the governing authority in Athens at the time. So the Parthenon has a complex history, first built as a temple, of course, then used as a church, and then as a mosque, and now as just a historical site. And I believe at one point it was even used as a military base or used by some military forces at one time. So this dude, Lord Elgin, was a British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire and was granted permission to remove almost half of the remaining sculptures. So all of the Elgin pieces, or the collection, was transported back to Britain. And again, this was in the early 1800s. So according to the British Museum of Art, which this is correct factual information, his actions were investigated during this time and were found to be entirely legal prior to the sculptures entering the collection at the British Museum of Art. This information is really everywhere. I studied this dispute in college, but this synopsis came directly from the British Museum of Art's website, where they're very transparent about this history and the status of their collection and their status between them and the Greek government and the conversations they have had. And their position on this topic was that it was legal in the 1800s, it was investigated before it came to our collection, and therefore we are not giving them up. And to the point of to the perspective of the Greek government and the museum at the Acropolis, they say that for those reasons and the fact that at that time Greece was under Ottoman rule, that a reevaluation needs to be taken into consideration. And at the museum, almost like in Bianca's story, they have empty placeholders for when those pieces are finally returned back to their original site.
Right. So I have been to Athens and I've been to the Acropolis and the Acropolis Museum. And first of all, it's just, it's stunning. The museum is so beautiful, and it's actually a relatively new museum. So part of these discussions was also the position of the British Museum was that there was concern that these objects wouldn't be taken care of in Greece. So then Greece built this entirely new, amazing facility to house and take care of all of these objects. But of course, like, the Parthenon is still standing, and lest we not forget that they are taking care of it. Like, it is the Parthenon itself is also under constant kind of care. And even when I went, there was scaffolding up and things like that. But it's really fascinating to go into the space of there's basically a large room with a makeshift kind of temple that replaces the Parthenon, and you can see, you know, the frieze and where the pediment would be, and there are these big, just, I mean, massive empty squares where pieces of the frieze would go, and they have like a big pedestal on the floor where this gorgeous statues of the pediment should be. So it's really fascinating to see. So thank you, Cindy, so much for your question. This is great. And Gianna, you know, I was also thinking, I was reading about some kind of art heists, like in that classical kind of cinematic sense. And do you think that the Mona Lisa that we see in the Louvre is actually the Mona Lisa?
Ooh, conspiracy theory.
Yeah, because the Mona Lisa was also stolen in like 1900.
It's been stolen a couple times, right?
Yeah, and I kind of think that the one that's up is not really the real one.
Yeah, I think that too. But I also think that, you know, Ryan Reynolds keeps Blake Lively in a box, so what do I know?
Totally. Okay, so next we have a question from Kitra.
Yay!
Hi, Gianna and Bianca. My name is Kitra, and I was wondering, when did people start using wedding rings? And why rings instead of anything else? All right, thank you.
All right, so this was a really interesting question, and one I didn't really know exactly the answer to. So I had to do some research, which was great. Love learning new things here at APT, to find out what were the influences of rings and how that started. So I found an article from Vanity Fair about the history of wedding rings, and I'm going to read off from the first portion of it, which gave a great synopsis. The ancient Egyptians believed in the vena amoris, literally the vein of love, that runs directly from the heart to the fourth finger on the left hand. Since then, wedding rings have been worn as a sign of the binding pledge between spouses. The endless circle shows the eternal nature of the union, with the open center a portal to the unexplored life ahead as a couple. So this sentimental theory is recognized in Western cultures and is the main reason the engagement and wedding ring are worn on the fourth finger, now referred to as the ring finger. In other cultures, however, the ring is worn on the right hand, since that is the hand you use for oaths and to take vows. The Greeks and Romans carried on the tradition, but during this era, betrothal rings were made out of leather, bone, or ivory. In early Rome, the use of metal rings began to surpass other materials, but the metal primarily used was iron. Gold and silver rings were given on rare occasions and only by the extremely wealthy. By the time of the Byzantine Empire, most rings began to be personalized and engraved with figures of the betrothed couple. Once Christianity became the empire's official religion, the couple were often depicted with Jesus or a cross between them, to bless their union. So now, with the rise of Christianity in a Western sense, we now see the popularity of engagement rings surpassing the idea of wedding rings. I'm going to link this article. I encourage you all to read the rest of it. It's really short. It talks a little bit about the diamond industry and, how we view now engagement rings and wedding rings in a Western sense. But it's funny that someone asked this question too, because recently I was having a conversation with Theben where we were talking about cultural differences of dating, engagements, and wedding or marriage ceremonies. And one of his cousins in Malaysia got engaged fairly recently, but she didn't have a traditional engagement ceremony and instead was proposed to by her fiance in a very Western manner where where they had a bunch of their friends and family together and he got down on one knee and proposed. And Theben was really taken back with this in a very excited way, but she is the first young person in their family to break away from other traditions. that I think are mostly rooted in Hindu tradition. And I think it's wonderful that his cousin got to have the experience she wanted to have. But it also got me thinking of, why is the process of engagement in a Western style seen as being so progressive? And I think that it has to do with, and I think it stems from what our dating culture is like here as well. So yeah, really interesting. And then that was around the time too when we were watching Indian Matchmaking on Netflix, and we binge watched the whole thing.
So this is such an interesting question for me, because I think I've talked about it a little bit, but I used to work for a wedding planner. And so I've not only helped to plan a lot of weddings in Oklahoma, but I've been to so many different types of weddings, and I'm consistently fascinated with repetitions and breakages of different kind of cultural norms or wedding etiquette, and what defines aesthetics for a wedding, and who can wear what, and why does it have to be this color, and the visuals of a wedding are fascinating to me. So it's always really fun to think about that. Thank you so much for your question, Kitra. Next, we have a question from Hannah. Hey, Gianna and Bianca, I know that practically there is some difficult or uncertainty even in relating things of the past to our culture now. However, I think professors do a disservice to themselves, the field, and to students by not showing the relevance of art history for people today, as well as how art history is not just some static, elitist, and monolithic institution, but is a dynamic relationship and always evolving dialogue between art and culture, history, politics, economics, psychology, religion, and pretty much everything else. Hannah, you're totally right. How much more cool would a Renaissance art class be if the professor played Beyonce and Jay-Z's Ape Shit as part of their discussion on the Mona Lisa, or drawing connections between Lady Gaga's meat dress and Soutine's carcass of beef and Damien Hirst's work in modern art class? As someone who wants to be a professor and teach art history and museum studies, I think this conversation is so important to have. So yeah, I love the podcast, and being an Artpop Tart, I've been listening since week 1. How crazy that it's been 4 months already, and I cannot wait for the next episode. Hannah, what a little precious Artpop Tart.
Right? You and us both, girl. I cannot believe.
Thank you so much for your question. This is awesome. And I totally agree that I think academics do their students and museums to their visitors, the same reference, a disservice by not making histories relevant and accessible. I think too often pop culture is seen as this kind of fleeting and disingenuous and kind of unworthy of serious study. But obviously we can't ignore the problems with popular culture. It often works in tandem with capitalism, with inequality, with that fake kind of allyship. Pop culture doesn't always necessarily equal progression, right? However, the art world is the same thing. So, i.e. the Whitney art news we had today, right? So I think that the more we realize that this world and all of our histories and all of our fields of study are complicated and they're tied together, and you know what, they're all problematic, the better we can learn from it. And I think that's so important to realize that we are creatures with histories, and we need to teach those histories in a respectful way. But we are also people who live and work and study in the moment, and whether we realize it or not, popular culture, visual culture, and our surroundings impact how we think and analyze the world, and part of that world is the histories that come from us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the challenge too that professors are up against is that it's really hard to fill art history classes sometimes, or it's hard to get students that are really invested in those classes, because a lot of time people are taking them as their gen ed. And me and Bianca have been so fortunate to see this opportunity between arts and pop culture, because for us, they're one and the same thing. Arts is part of pop culture. Art is one of the most incredibly social things that we can be a part of and that we can experience. But by taking art history and then using intersectional approaches from taking our film class, from taking our feminist studies classes, and for me, especially taking my studio classes, we have that privilege to get informations elsewhere besides in the art history classroom. So really, if what we're asking is for this to use this lens and to talk about art in tandem with our contemporary culture and climate, what we're honestly asking for is a rewrite in curriculum. We're asking for added nude classes. And also another challenge with that is that we know how vast art history is, right? Because we're talking about the entire world here. We're talking about different artist movements, and it's already challenging enough to pack all of that information into one class. And most art history classes, when you start getting in upper level, even my Renaissance class required that I take prereqs to get to that point. So it's gonna take a lot to get there, but I think as history expands, which it obviously will, these classes and these curriculums cannot stay the same.
Our final question is from Abigail. How has the art world changed because of COVID? And are you seeing any pop culture trends that will be big for 2021? Ooh, Abigail, thank you so much. For me, I mean, personally, COVID has just changed a lot of the way my job functions. So the way we showcase and discuss art and how we engage with different technologies and kind of use those to pull different audiences. And we've actually found that because we're hosting digital events, it's a way for us to create access to people who aren't necessarily in our regional vicinities, right? So they can come and have these discussions with us virtually, even if they're on the other side of the country. You know, it's forced our museum and a lot of other museums to be more flexible. You know, funding has always been an issue, but now we have to think, how are we going to continue to take care of the artworks as well as the people who care for them? So interestingly, I was talking with some people about the Met reopening, and I kind of want to go because in a large museum like the Met, we often have what Gianna was talking about earlier, that overcrowded experience, and there's a struggle to see everything because of crowding. So I think moving forward, our museum experiences and looking at quote unquote famous art might actually become much more intimate. And I wonder if our experience with the museum space is going to become more intimate because we're actually more isolated in the museum. So in terms of trends, you know, I really hope that we see exhibitions and works produced about COVID. I would imagine that themes of kind of displacement and isolation will be big. I mean, after 2016, we had exhibitions that were all about the election and politics and social movements that went up, you know, pretty quickly after 2016. But at the same time, I don't know, because it seems like everything is changing on a daily basis, and I don't know what will be, or I don't know where we'll be in 2021. But I do wonder if mask fashion might be something that the Met tackles for a Met Gala exhibition. I would be really fascinating to see what fashion in art museums is like how that is related to COVID and how that becomes a trend in the art world.
Yeah, masks have become a trend in the art world. There are already artists out there that have been using ideas of like masquerading and masks and wearable sculpture, and their art has really been highlighted during this time. And I have seen a lot of people in just my circle and my community participate in online exhibitions and competitions where they have made art-based creative masks. And I was talking to a girlfriend of mine who's in the fashion industry and just graduated in fashion and merchandising and marketing, and she was talking about, you know, how hard it is in this country to get people to wear masks, but how it's so interesting when we look at other countries, how they wear masks on a daily basis because of the air pollution there. But it's interesting how masks are already incorporated in Eastern fashion and high fashion, elevated fashion. So I think it will be interesting to see what happens there with the crossover between arts and fashion and consumption here. As far as how the art world has changed because of COVID, online or virtual exhibitions have been a thing for a while now, but for the sake of social distancing and for safety reasons, I've seen virtual exhibitions also be heightened during this time. I participated in one, you know, while I was just, you know, graduating. I think I hadn't even graduated yet. So those have become a lot more apparent. It's a great way, any way to get your art out is always a great thing to do.
Right.
But they're not as always revered as, or looked at as important as literal physical exhibitions. So, yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. This was fun. As always. Gianna, thank you for doing 20 episodes of this with me.
20 freaking episodes, man.
Yeah, man.
We lived to see the day.
Truly.
We made it.
Get ready for 200.
Oh, God.
You can always send in questions to us, and we will be more than happy to answer them. We will get in contact with you if you've been selected to receive some APT and Discordia merch, and we hope to be talking with one of you soon on the podcast. So thank you guys so much for being amazing listeners. And with that, I think, Gianna, we'll talk to you all on Tuesday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.